My name is Jack Berkowitz. I'm the Chief Data Officer of Securiti.ai. We're a company that specializes in data security, data privacy, and now AI privacy, AI governance, and all the things that concern Chief Data Officers. This is part of this ongoing set of interviews we've been doing with really the top echelon of data leaders throughout the world. And today, I couldn't be happier. We've got Linda Powell, who's the Deputy Chief Data Officer of the Bank of New York. Linda, welcome to the show. I don't know it's a show, but welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to see you again. How are you?
Great, great. So, Linda, maybe give everybody just a view about what you do, who you are, and what's unique about banking that for those people that are in different industries and different things like that.
Sure. So I'm Linda Powell. I'm the global head of data governance and our data management practice here at Bank of New York Mellon. I've been here for a little over 3 years, close to 3.5 years. And we're really focused on how do we use data governance to really drive and build our commercial products and really commercialize data. We look at data governance as an enabler to moving faster rather than a bunch of rules that people have to follow arbitrarily.
Yeah, and when we were talking before this, that's the part I love, right? This idea that we as a profession or as a discipline are really enabling the businesses to move
hmm
forward, as opposed to just a compliance checkpoint. It's not a bother to do this work. It's actually the springboard to the business advantage.
Yeah, it's a little bit more work up front, but it's a lot less work on the end when you set it up correctly. There's an old saying about you can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Yeah,
Um, and we're really focused on minimizing costs and reducing risk for the bank overall by embedding things like privacy and data governance into the entire life cycle from the beginning of the life cycle all the way through.
yeah, that's awesome. But at the same time, right, you mentioned risk and chief risk officers of banks. I've heard they're peers to the CEO. I actually met a CEO of a bank just recently who said, "Well, actually, I think I work for the chief risk officer." But so but the regulators do have their rules. They do have their
hmm
views. You have to work with them very closely. I was just reading, up on some regulations earlier today. So how do you see all this new technology, whether it's now data governance needs to get into unstructured data governance,
hmm
or now you've got not just data governance, but model governance, you
hmm
know, how do you see all this new technology coming together and how will the regulators help interpret all of this?
Sure. So I'll start with full disclosure. I spent much of my career working for banking regulators. So I have the ability of looking at things from both sides and have great respect for both sides. Um, so you're asking about the technology, and a lot of the technology is helping us enable and make governance easier. So for example, metadata. If and for those who may not know, metadata is data about data. So if you think about a soup can, the label on the soup can is the metadata. It's what's the actual nutritional value in there. And so we have tools now that help, glean metadata, that help display metadata, that help us manage our metadata so that it's easier for an end user to understand what they've got. Again, going back to the soup example, if I don't have any labels on anything in my pantry, it's hard to make dinner. The same thing is true for using data. If you don't know what data you have, it's hard to use it. You have to look at it first. You have to do some analysis. You have to figure it out. And the better organized we are from the beginning of the process, the easier it is to use the data. And especially as we're getting into a whole new world of, you mentioned model management, but also artificial intelligence and machine learning, the better we have our data organized, the easier it is to do the analytics on data. You spend less time um, um, wrangling, for lack of a better term, and figuring out what the data is and how to format it, and more time on the analysis.
Yeah, and that's awesome, right? I was in Chicago a few weeks ago and I was meeting with some other CDOs, and there were a lot of people asking, I have a need to get things done faster. Will these
Hmm.
tools help me? And yeah, they're helping. They're
Hmm.
getting us there. So, you know, when you and I met before this to get together to figure out, hey, do we want to do this thing? You were bringing up, and I will just do a horrible job, and I'm going to read the name of this standard that everybody's trying to get to in the financial industry, but boy, it's out there. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision Standard number 239, which is
Yes,
really
excellent.
principles for effective risk data aggregation and risk reporting. Maybe talk to us a little bit about actually what that means and
Sure.
why is it such a challenge to get this done? Yeah.
Yeah. So the Basel Committee is an international banking organization that sets some guidelines and standards for how the banks around the globe should engage. And BCBS 239 is specific to risk data aggregation and reporting. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that at a bank, you compile a lot of reports to manage your risk, whether it's, I love to talk about liquidity because liquidity is king for the banking industry. We have lots of reports that manage our liquidity risk. You have operational risks, we have a whole risk appetite. And so you have a lot of information that risk committees use in order to determine what is the risk for the bank. And so, what BCBS 239 says, you have to have really good basic hygiene for both your data management and your report management. So, when I read through BCBS 239, um, what we did at Bank of New York was we took all of the data requirements in BCBS 239 and made sure that they were embedded in our core data management policies. So we don't just treat the data used for risk aggregation with great care. We treat all of the data that we're using for management and regulatory reporting and decision making with the same level of care, where we want to know that it's coming from an authoritative source, that there's data quality controls around it, that we know where the data is coming from, we know how it's being used. And those are all the best practices that are highlighted in the BCBS 239 principle. The principle also talks a lot about good reporting governance and some of the best practices. Understand who your audience is for the report that you're creating. Understand where you're getting the data for the report that you're creating. Make sure that when you're automating the report and you're putting it together, that you have controls in place to double check. These are all good best practices. And so, what we're trying to do is embed those into our core policies and principles so that it's not something extra special just for those reports, but that we have a baseline of best practices across the bank.
No,
There's
I think you
also
really
some things that, you like we have to have an inventory of the reports, and those things we're addressing as well.
I mean, I think you hit it, right? A lot of times people are looking at regulations as being barriers, just the same way as we were just start talking about governance as being barriers. But really, what these are good ways to run your business, right? Like,
Mhm.
who wouldn't want a good inventory of all the reports generated, right? Who wouldn't want to make sure that things are there? One of the big things that I've been talking to a lot of CDOs about right now is, do I have the rights to use data in my models
Mhm.
downstream? Whether it's because it's consumer data or somebody's opting in, or is it licensed data? Like I license data from Dun and Bradstreet or from Thomson Reuters or Refinitiv or LSCG, I think is the name
Yeah.
now, right? Do I have the rights to use that in the model and being able to track that and understand that, follow it through, and having that visibility uh, is really, you know, 90% of the need. I work at Security. You see behind one of these shoulders, it says the Data Command Center. Behind one of my shoulders, I'm not sure which one. And and indeed, that, as a CDO, is what you're looking for, right? How do I
Yeah,
do I
yeah,
am I in command of this stuff? And if I'm not in command, what am I doing? What are we doing?
yep. So understanding that how am I allowed to use the data is critically important. We have contracts with lots of vendors. We have to make sure we're complying with all of our license agreements and contractors. We have to ensure that we're adhering to client contracts. Um, there's laws and regulations on how you're allowed to use some of the data. But I think what's just as important as the how can I store and use my data is the how should I use
Yeah,
my data. So, and this is we've put a lot of focus on data ethics. And I'm happy to say that before Gen AI came out, we had started putting together our data ethics framework, and how should we be looking at data that we're using for analytics. And because we had gone down that path, I think it's made it a little bit easier for us because we already had some of the guardrails up before we got inundated with the onslaught of Gen AI. So we had already thought about a number of the controls we needed to have in place. So I think that helped a lot. And I think the should I question is really been a driver for helping us figure out what are the controls that we should have in place when we're using data for whatever purpose it is that we're using it.
I love that. I love that. And in fact, why don't we stop there? I think the notion about what should we be doing and having that ethics committee, that ethics board, sharing that and having that joint decision making going on is really the essence or the, of what we're all just trying to achieve. So
Yeah,
love. So Linda, thank you so much for being with us today. Any last
sure.
thoughts for everybody? Put you
Uh,
on the
no, just manage your data well.
Awesome. Awesome. Words to live by. There's other rules
Yes,
of life, but that's a great one. All
yes,
right. So thank you, Linda, for being with us today. My name is Jack Berkowitz. I'm the Chief Data Officer of Security.ai. Security is a company that builds behind me on one of these two, the Data Command Center. But really what it is about providing capabilities for chief data offices, chief privacy offices, chief security offices, chief risk officers to be able to look at information cohesively, and whether that's data security or data privacy or data rights, AI models, generative AI, governance, it's all there together. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon.
sure. Thanks.